Well, I read, I had the privilege, of course, of having an advanced copy of Victoria's presentation, which I read with great interest. I think it is a fascinating subject. And as I read it, and again as I heard it, there are, as it were, three key related topics that her paper raises. The first is, of course, the question of diasporas. The second is the question of media, including new media, and the, for me at least, somewhat complex notion of the public sphere. And the third, and the one that I find most interesting and poignant, is, of course, the work of remembrance, the work of remembering the dead, and how that should be done, and how we should understand it. So I just want to make some very quick points and also some questions that I think I would like to put back to Professor Bernal. First of all, diasporas. Diaspora is one of those words that I have noticed creeping into my own conversation in the last few years. It seems to have slipped into all our discourses somewhat unawares, I find. I have a graduate student, Seiram Abel, who is from Ghana, and she and I talk unproblematically about the Ghanaian diaspora in the United States. I talk with my friend and colleague Aswin about the Indian diaspora in the United States. I find myself wondering sort of what, I mean, is it just a general term for overseas populations who are, shall we say, for one reason or another, separated from their homelands? Or does it have a more specific and restricted meaning? When, of course, we think of the original diasporic people, namely the Jews, and the Jewish diaspora, which was a result of the failure of the Jewish uprising against the empire and its brutal repression by Rome, and the forcible dispersion of the Jews, the scattering of the Jews throughout the nations, we see that the notion of diaspora, at least if we take this as our lead, has a more particular focus, and it has perhaps two characteristics. The first would be the characteristic of forcible dispersion, either by, shall we say, inhuman fate, or else by the forces of history. Of course, it was historical forces that scattered the Jews. It was historical forces that scattered, when I think of the diaspora closest to my home, which is Britain, I think, of course, of the forcible dispersion of the Scots following the Battle of Culloden in 1745, and the brutal ethnic cleansing that the lowland Protestant Scots plus the English inflicted on the Highland Scottish people, whose culture was destroyed. They were dispossessed of their lands, and the Scottish Highland people were again scattered through the world in the course of the 19th century. And a second feature, I think, of diasporic peoples, if the first is their forcible dispersion from their homeland, the second one would be the question of, are they people in exile? That is to say, do they experience and understand themselves as strangers in a strange land? In other words, are diasporic peoples people with a dream of returning? In that sense, it seems to me, for instance, that you do have temporary diasporas, such as the diaspora of South Africans under apartheid, and the current diaspora of Zimbabweans in exile in light of political and economic unrest in that great southern African country. So I just wanted to sort of raise that question, and I wasn't clear in what sense Victoria was talking of the Eritrean diaspora. The second point, to do with the public sphere. It is worth remembering that for Habermas, at least, it was the public sphere, that it was the general public in the general interest and the process of general will formation. And this, of course, was understood originally within a national context. When the internet came along, there was some initial sort of, I think, enthusiasm for the notion of a world or a global public sphere. And there was some talk to begin with of the notion of global citizens and so on and so forth. I don't see that we have anything like that in place at the moment. And it seems to me better to think of to think of a plurality, a huge diversity of publics, some of which may indeed be political and some of which we could understand as political counter-publics. I just wanted to put that up as my second point. The third point, and the one that I found most intriguing, is the work of Remembering the Dead. And I was particularly taken by the use of the word martyrs to describe the dead. The word martyrs, of course, is a religious term rather than a political term. And when I think of it, I mean, in Britain, for instance, all over Britain, we have war memorials that commemorate, war heroes, the dead. I live just outside the city of Oxford, where there is a famous Martyrs' Memorial. And the Martyrs' Memorial is to three Anglican bishops, Cranmer, Latimer, and Ridley, who were burnt at the stake by Mary Tudor in the mid-1950s as part of the Catholic backlash against the secession of the Church of England from Rome. Did I say 1950? Yes, well, sorry, I'm obviously having a senior moment here. Time collapses. Yes, indeed, 500 years ago. I just want to sort of finish with just two quick thoughts then on sort of why, whether or not, so to speak, designating the dead as martyrs sort of has any religious as well as political connotation in this context. As I understand it, the population of Eritrea is pretty, well, there's a large Muslim population and a large Christian population as well. And a final thought, the notion of a martyr's album has a certain particular poignancy to it. It's not the same as a memorial, which is something in stone that endures through centuries in time. An album is something that comes out of the private sphere, out of private life. I think of it in relation to Roland Barthes' beautiful notion of the punctum, that an album is an album of the remembrance of a wedding in particular. And I noticed that, so to speak, the impermanence of the album itself is indeed, as it were, a feature that defines it as an album. And underlying this, of course, are issues to do, finally, with the role, the materiality of media, the great theme of the Canadian economic historian Harold Innis, whose book Empire and Civilization, you will remember, distinguished the bias of communication between media that are biased towards time, which commemorate in time on durable media, and media that are biased towards space, which are impermanent, transient, and, so to speak, part of the present. With that, I'll conclude my thoughts and my thanks again to Professor Bernal for a very fascinating presentation.